Hey guys, Dr. Melanie here. The topic of today's video has been requested by many of you, and yet I hesitated for a long time. Today, I will talk about the neurobiology of pleasure and pain in the context of punishment or force-free training. I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to create this video because one, I'm not here to tell anyone what to do or not to do, and two, this topic is so easy to misinterpret and create more divide when it comes to the discussion around training methods. So, before I dive into this, I want to make clear that this video is not meant to support one or the other training method. While I will mention training tools at the end of this, I will do so in the context of the neurobiology of pain and pleasure. My goal is to provide food for thought and potentially shift the discussion around training methods into a direction that can be not only useful for everyone, but also create a common ground for pushing the envelope in the dog training world. With that, let's get started. One of the most intriguing, or maybe I should say surprising findings in the field of neuroscience is the fact that the brain needs pain to understand pleasure and pleasure to understand pain. It will all make more sense as I go on, but while we can consciously avoid inflicting pain on our dogs, we cannot prevent our dog's brain to activate pain pathways anyways. When we talk about the brain, we really talk about neurons that are connected to process external and internal information and generate an output in form of behaviors or bodily changes. Neurons communicate with each other via electrical signals and neurotransmitters. One of the most talked about neurotransmitters is dopamine. It has become somewhat of a buzzword, and in a way, this is great because it raises awareness of what pleasure and motivation mean. On the other hand, it holds the risk of oversimplifying complex processes, especially in pop science. Dopamine has been known to be involved in reward processing since the 50s. We know now it's more important in motivation and the pursuit of pleasure rather than experiencing pleasure itself. And the levels of dopamine release in the brain are a measure of how addictive something is. That can be a drug or an activity. We all know how a dog looks like that is addicted to playing fetch or chasing a squirrel. But here comes the interesting part. Pleasure and pain are processed in overlapping brain regions, and there's a very important reason why that is. The maintenance of life means the maintenance of homeostasis. Anything that is out of balance is more likely to die faster. High temperature, like a fever, is usually no good news. High heartbeat, high cholesterol, low blood sugar. The brain really has two main functions: predicting what will happen next and maintaining all body functions for survival. And that includes a balance between experiencing pain and pleasure. So, in other words, every time pleasure is experienced, pain pathways are activated at the same time. And there are two main reasons for it. One, throwing pain into the mix creates a sense of craving. That craving is more a result of pain rather than wanting more, so that we stay motivated to pursue what's good for us, to pursue pleasure. In the world of scarcity, where hunting meant spending lots of energy, this was crucially important. But we've seen this in everyday life as well. Kids that start crying when playtime is over, or a dog with a hanging head reluctant to leave the dog park after play. The other reason is to cap dopamine release and get it back to baseline, so the brain has the ability to reevaluate every new experience. If dopamine levels were to stay high, the brain wouldn't be able to detect something that is equally or even more pleasurable. In layman terms, the brain would run out of dopamine. What's important is that this happens reflexively. We don't have control over it. Our dogs don't have control over it. It just is. And that's really important, because if we can control it, it is even more important to understand how to leverage it. What happens if we go overboard with the pleasure? Say the dog only gets treats. Since the 70s, scientists agreed that any prolonged or repeated departure from what we call hedonic or affective neutrality has a cost. Meaning, the brain will adjust to get back to balance again. If there's a constant or too much pleasure in life, two things will happen. One, neuroadaptation leads to shorter and weaker pleasurable sensations of the same reward. That's when you need higher value treats or more treats to keep your dog's attention. And two, To balance out the massive pleasure intake, pain pathways are getting more and more activated. As a consequence, the balance gets weighted to the side of pain. Pleasure feels less pleasurable, pain feels more painful. And how do we know that? A universal symptom of withdrawal of any kind is anxiety. Dogs don't settle well, constantly looking for some sort of interaction. Being content with less input is tough. Always needing a toy, and any experience of pain or discomfort makes them crumble like a cookie because they're more vulnerable to pain. Everything I said until now is still an oversimplification of things. Sometimes whether the same thing is pleasurable or painful even depends on the context. Petting your dog can be wanted or aversive depending on the dog's arousal level, for example. But despite its complexity, the brain machinery responsible for processing pain and pleasure has remained largely the same across species throughout evolution. Okay, so let's look briefly at pain. The experience of discomfort can lead to pleasure. Self-regulatory mechanisms kick in to release dopamine. Intermittent exposure to discomfort leads to a weighted set point towards pleasure with the effect of becoming less vulnerable to pain. You might have heard the argument that a dog looks happy after punishment, so it can't be that bad. In fact, the dog might have felt discomfort, but the brain tries to counterbalance it through the release of dopamine and therefore experience of pleasure. There has been intensive research on the effects of small doses of pain or discomfort. Adaptive responses of the brain to moderate environmental challenges improves its functionality or tolerance to more severe challenges. And that's incredibly important given that we are living in a world where we have such high demands on our dogs. There's traffic noise, strangers coming over, vet visits, other dogs, car rides, plane rides, and the list goes on and on. Now, worms exposed to heat survived more challenging heat conditions. Fruit flies exposed to strong gravitational changes were more agile and lived longer. Intermittent fasting or cold exposure makes us more resilient to mood changes. The research is quite vast and impressive, but pursuing pain is kind of hard because it goes against our cultural values and innate reflexes. But we also live in a world of abundance where we entire warehouses packing with treats and toys for our dogs. So we need to be able to reevaluate our values and help our dogs to put life into context by giving their brain a chance to create a balance between pain and pleasure. A new body of research is tapping more into the neurobiology of leveraging pain to treat pain, often in the context of recovering from depression, trauma, or anxiety. The increase of short-term stress hormones and neurotransmitters offset the effects of chronic pain or stress, likely due to the complex relationship between pain and pleasure. And that brings me to a super brief discussion on training methods and training tools. Again, I'm not here to tell anyone what to do, what tools to use, or what training camp is better. Instead, I'd like to shift focus to something we all want anyways. Prepare our dogs for all the challenges in the world. And in order to do that, we need to understand the consequences of an imbalance in our dog's pain-pleasure experience. We shouldn't ignore what the brain is built to do and how it tries to maintain homeostasis. Avoiding stress or discomfort leads to more stress and discomfort. On the other hand, implementing stress is so much more than just using aversive tools. Using correction as a last resort that comes as a surprise to the dog because he or she has never experienced that before is more likely to cause fear conditioning towards the tool. Experiencing stress or discomfort does not mean experiencing fear, though. So it's important to understand the nuances to avoid strong fear conditioning. For example, using corrections or any aversive experience without incremental and thoughtful implementation is likely to cause fear conditioning. Heavy reliance on correction and punishment is causing chronic stress, which is also causing an imbalance. So discussion is needed should focus less on the tools and more on achieving the right balance between pain and pleasure to create maximum mental resilience. And that might look different for each and every dog. In summary, our approach to training should be informed by an understanding of the neurobiology of pain and pleasure. By respecting the brain's need for the balance and homeostasis, and carefully considering how we introduce and manage stressors, we can guide our dogs towards greater mental resilience and overall well-being. The key is a personalized approach that takes into account the unique needs and experiences of each dog, fostering a training environment that is both effective and compassionate. That's it for today. Let me know what you think about pain and pleasure in the comments below, and I will see you very soon.